I said yesterday the Washington Commanders should be on the phone with San Francisco to discuss trading for wide receiver Deebo Samuel, but does Chris agree? Speaking of odd developments, Washington is visiting the potential number 1 overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, and Jason Friedman's testimony to Congress is in question, and why that could spell trouble for the Commanders whistleblower right now on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms, and we thank you for making us your first listen or view every single day. I am David Harrison, covering the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, and my co-host Chris Russell, the Rooster, one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980. Find Chris and Pete Medhurst there Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern, or anytime along with this show on the Audacy app. When we're not there or here, we're on Twitter at DHarrison82, at WrestleMania621, and at LO Commanders. We thank you again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast first listen or your first view every single day. Chris, Wednesday, it came out that Deebo Samuel wants to be traded from the San Francisco 49ers. I said that the Washington Commanders should absolutely be on the phone, placing a call to John Lynch of the San Francisco 49ers to see what the price might be and if they would be willing to pay it. But you weren't here. So now let's get your idea of this, because not every Commanders fan agreed with me.
All right. So here's the deal. I think you should absolutely make the phone call.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt to make the phone call in any way, shape, or form. It's free. Bruce Allen once told me they have phones in Hawaii, David.
Yes, they do.
They
have phones in Afghanistan, Chris. I can tell you that.
I mean, you would know that. I can't confirm that, but you would know that. But Bruce Allen once told me in a press conference, seriously, the former president of the Washington then Redskins, that they have phones in Hawaii. So I assume they have phones in San Francisco as well, right?
Yes.
So I would think we could make a phone call from Washington, D.C. or Northern Virginia to San Francisco to see what the price might be, if it's even an option. Now, that's where I basically stop agreeing essentially with those that want to bring in Deebo Samuel. Yeah. And here's the reason why. And it's a couple fold, right? I love the player. I get that the player has a versatile skill set, but I don't know why the player, Deebo Samuel, is upset in San Francisco. I assume it's because he wants to be paid as a top flight wide receiver, and being used as a gadget weapon is not getting him the money that he wants. Right. I would assume he's trying to preserve his career by being more of a traditional receiver, as opposed to, again, said gadget weapon, Cordarrelle Patterson type, the way he was used the second half of last year and in the playoffs. I get what Deebo Samuel is at, but what I don't agree with is, the way he's handling it. So now I've got a character/maturity issue. On top of that, David, here's my question to you. They brought in Curtis Samuel and paid Curtis Samuel a lot of money. Yep. And they brought back J.D. McKissick. Do we not already have, if Curtis Samuel is healthy, and that's a huge if, do we not already have basically a combined version of what Deebo Samuel brings to the San Francisco 49ers offense already on the roster, and that you're already paying, a significant chunk of money to, not to mention McKissick, Curtis Samuel, and really Antonio Gibson, if you're planning on using Antonio Gibson a little bit differently this year, more as a receiver, more as a gadget type, more in the slot, all the different things that Deebo Samuel does. So I look at it, and maybe I'm wrong, as kind of a repetitive spending of resources, unless we're talking about another scenario, which we can visit after we bounce it back to you, of course.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at, I wouldn't go as far as to say that Washington needs to go get Deebo Samuel no matter what the cost. Like, whatever the 49ers want, just give it to them and bring Deebo Samuel to Washington. I just think the talent is intriguing enough. He's a young guy to put in the phone call, like you said, and then go from there. Just see what the expense is going to be. But it's important to know why he wants to leave San Francisco. And, it's important to remember. So illegal tampering, right? is, courting a player or their agent or talking publicly about wanting a player that's under contract. However, teams can give permission, and the permission isn't always made public, right? You go back to trades before where it's like, DeAndre Hopkins getting traded from the Houston Texans to the Arizona Cardinals, and he's getting a new 5-year, $140 million contract in the process. That contract did not get negotiated in the 5 minutes it took for the trade to go through and Adam Schefter to break the news. Right. That contract was negotiated as part of the terms of the trade. So teams will talk to these players before trades go down, and that is a very, very important detail. Why is Deebo Samuel wanting out of San Francisco, number one? Number two, why did he feel he needed to go the route that he went? Because if this is a blitz, if this is an ambush from Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 49ers, where they had no warning and no sign, the Deebo wanted out of San Fran, and then all of a sudden he unfollows all their social media, takes all the Niners logos off, and then releases a statement through his agent saying, I want out of San Fran. That could definitely be a problem. So you need to find out what the reasoning is for him to want out of San Francisco as well. My assessment comes from not knowing any of that.
Right.
And then, like I said several times this offseason, I operate off of what we know. And as of right now, we don't know what Curtis Samuel brings to the Washington Commanders, but we do know what Deebo Samuel could bring, which is why I absolutely want Washington to at least kick the tires on the deal.
Well, let me ask you this. Does the scenario in your mind change if, and again, this is a hypothetical, if they use Curtis Samuel as a trade chip to San Francisco as part of a Deebo Samuel deal, Samuel for Samuel. And again, you would have to deal with dead money on the Curtis Samuel contract, which would probably make it prohibitive. And I haven't calculated exactly that. Or let me ask you a further example. And again, I would say no to this. Absolutely. What if you've determined that you're just not going to be able to meet Terry McLaurin's price or don't want to meet Terry McLaurin's price? And what if you use Terry McLaurin as a trade chip back as part of maybe a different package or a bigger package involving Deebo Samuel back to Washington? Do any of those scenarios speak to you in terms of wanting to be a little bit more aggressive in this situation?
I would say no to Terry. I would say yes to Curtis, and that dead cap number for Curtis Samuel, I did look that up earlier, is pretty prohibitive. But we have seen situations where teams are willing to take on enough. I mean, the Washington Commanders just did it with Carson Wentz, took on all of Carson Wentz's guaranteed money, so Indianapolis didn't have to pay any of those penalties. Curtis Samuel, I don't know that the Niners would be necessarily willing to do that, and if you do, you're going to typically pay a higher cost in the draft pick. If the Niners are going to take all of Samuel's dead money for you, you're going to give them more in draft capital, you would assume. So again, and those things may make it prohibitive. So what Curtis Samuel at the end of the day does, even at his best with Curtis Samuel, and this goes back to Carolina, obviously, as a running back / wide receiver, he still was not as effective as Deebo was. And really, Chris, 2021 is the first time Deebo really played that role. Now, that's a positive and a negative. It's a positive because it means there's untapped potential potentially still in that part of Deebo's game. It's a negative because it also could be he was so successful because teams really didn't know how to study it. Now they have that film, and granted, it's Washington, not San Francisco, but I mean, to a certain extent, you're kind of limited by what you can do anyway. So there's a plus minus to that whole situation as well. I just, if it gets to draft day and you're sitting at number 11 and the board doesn't fall your way, Garrett Wilson's gone, Kyle Hamilton's gone, Derek Stingley Jr. is gone if you love him. I feel like it's just a conversation that needs to happen. It just needs to have the dial tone needs to come up is what I'm saying.
I'm all for a good conversation.
Yeah.
We try and bring that to you, 5 days a week. And Lord knows I've got plenty of time on the radio to provide good conversation. Whether I do or not, I don't know. I'm all for good conversation. Yeah. So make all the love on the phone you want. It's just a matter of what you bring home.
Yeah, we'll see if a deal gets done.
That's the question. And here's another quick thing. What if Deebo Samuel wants to be paid as a top flight wide receiver, 21, 22, $23 million, Christian Kirkish money, maybe a little bit more, but he doesn't want to play the role that he did the second half and then in the playoffs of last, that's something else that you have to figure out and ascertain. Like you said, part of the pre-trade type negotiation discussion. You got to find out, tap into his DNA. What are you really about? What do you want?
Adam Schefter said, and this is speculatory, but he said maybe it could possibly be that Deebo wants to be closer to home. He's from South Carolina.
Well, Samuel shot that down on Instagram, as the kids do. So he kind of.
Oh, did he? Okay, I didn't see that. Okay.
I was talking about that as well, and I was thinking, well, Washington is closer, but really, if he wants to, Charlotte, Atlanta, New Orleans, and some of those places need receivers. Certainly more. Plus, don't forget Robert Saleh, the head coach of the Jets, and Mike LaFleur were in San Francisco with Deebo. So, I mean, those are all better options, I think, for Deebo Samuel to go elsewhere besides Washington.
You know what it is, Chris? I figured it out just now on this recording. Deebo wants to go play for Mike McDaniel in Miami with Tyreek Hill because Tom Brady's coming in 2023.
Oh, see, now you're at like 6 degrees of separation type of thing. I mean, we cook up a good conspiracy theory around here. All right, coming up next, Washington, the Commanders, are meeting with one of the draft's top and rising prospects. Why? Who that is? What it's all about, and what it could mean for a couple of big-name defenders. That's next right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast, along with David Harrison. I'm Chris Russell. Great to have you with us. And here for our friends at Shady Rays. Who is Shady Rays? What is Shady Rays? Well, Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes, guys. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane, and we mean insane, protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. The question I have is, do they include protection for a dog eating your sunglasses? Hope so. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. And if you give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses from Shady Rays. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. Celebrate Deebo Samuel in Washington or something like that. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews.
Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all your latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, thanks for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and your first watch each and every day. Of course, the NFL draft is here, guys. Less than a week away. Fans are dying to know who their team will take. Locked On and Audacy present the ultimate NFL mock draft 2022. It's the biggest mock draft on the planet, featuring 70 local Locked On local experts and Audacy NFL insiders, including Michael Irvin and Jason Lockenfor. Over 6 episodes, the ultimate NFL mock draft is available now on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast on Audacy and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, along with David Harrison, I'm Chris Russell. Good to have you with us again. Make sure you follow at LO Commanders, David at DHarrison82 on Twitter. I'm at WrestleMania61. David, make sure you read him, SI.com's Fan Nation. Of course, we try and keep you up to date on everything going on in the world of the Washington Commanders, and sometimes it is a carousel out of control. So, David, the top 30 visits basically wrapped up earlier this week, but we found out through Ben Standing of The Athletic, who does a great job. He had a source say the Washington Commanders are going to actually visit Travon Walker out of Georgia. We don't know exactly when. We believe it's like now, like right around this time, right? Or maybe this weekend. Either way, it doesn't matter. What's interesting here is Travon Walker is thought to be, in most people's eyes, the second best edge rusher in this particular draft class. Thought to be, in some people's minds, and in most mock drafts, a top 5 pick, a big-time athletic riser, right? And a guy that just is one of those guys that everybody kind of falls in love with in the pre-draft process. And maybe his athleticism and his testing and his drills and stuff like that maybe speaks bigger than his actual performance, production, and play at Georgia. And I guess my question is do you have an issue with, in any way, them doing the extra due diligence to meet with Travon Walker? Let's start there.
I never have any problem with due diligence, you know what I mean, and doing your homework on all the players available. I think it is important to note that, like, you know, from what I read or from what I understand, Ron Rivera is not the one going down there. Martin Mayhew's not the one going down there, and I don't even think Jack Del Rio is even the one going down there. So you're probably talking a position coach or, you know, a scout or something like that who's going down there. So while it is, you know, significant, I don't know that it's as significant as you know, as a lot of people. I think this time last year there were reports of I think it was Ron Rivera going to look at somebody, but it turned out like their nephew played with the players. Like there was some, I remember vaguely, there's some kind of stories like, oh, Ron's going to go see this NFL draft prospect. Well, turned out like, no, like the prospect happened to be there at the same time, like Ron's nephew did. I don't know if you remember that situation or not, Chris. My thing with Travon Walker is he's obviously very talented, right? I don't want to diminish that at all, but he's more of a run stuffer than he is a pass rusher. In fact, Lance Zierlein's draft profile of Walker says that he's probably a guy in his first couple of seasons you're going to pull off the field in passing downs. And Washington's defensive issues had nothing to do with the run game. They were actually pretty stout against the run game. It was getting after the quarterback. And if Travon Walker isn't going to bolster that part of your defense, then I don't know if a trade up is really worth it. And I don't know that I would put him above just because of what the team needs necessarily, Kyle Hamilton or a Garrett Wilson, even if he was there at number 11.
You know, I think it's interesting, and that was, you know, that was what my understanding of Travon Walker is again more of a run stopper, more of an athlete on the rise, as opposed to a pure natural pass rusher. Now, I would point out in year one of Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera, they did struggle. David, before we started working together, they struggled weirdly to stop the run. They got run on by some pedestrian running attacks. So while that got better last year, the pass rush, like you said, got worse. To me, even though he's projected to be a top 5 pick in most mock drafts, and again, I even saw one mock draft, I can't remember who it was, maybe PFF, I can't remember, that had him at number one overall. This to me seems like, I don't know if it's Dante Fowler. I don't know if you remember him when he went, I think he went number 1 in 2015 or number 2 or whatever it was. And I remember back then, the Washington then Redskins and Scott McLuhan, their former GM, they had him as their top player on the board, and I didn't see it out of Florida. This, to me, seems like that type of thing where you get this athlete who tests really good, and you get all the upside and the juice, and you get all the hairs on your arm starts to, you know, come up, and you think, oh, man, we could be onto something that nobody else is onto. But how good is he, A, and how long is it going to take him to develop as a situational pass rusher, number one? Yeah. Number two, David, how good is he at truly stopping the run when he was surrounded by all of that great talent at Georgia? I mean, these are the questions you have to ask.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you know, shout out to our guy, Tony Wiggins, host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, our ultimate mock draft that's going on right now. And we'll talk about that here in just, or we just talked about that. You can catch, you know, that going on. Travon Walker, number 1 overall pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he talked about how some people look at Walker as, you know, having some of the raw athletic ability of a Myles Garrett. And I mean, I don't know that Myles Garrett has, I mean, he's definitely been good in flashes and good for a very consistent amount of time, but I don't know that that's really the proper comp for a guy like Travon Walker. And again, scouting is all the eye of the beholder, right? And that's what a lot of this mock draft and speculation is from. I just personally don't see it. I also don't see any guys like George Karlaftis. Like, I don't really see a lot of the hype in him being mocked as high as he has been either. And then, of course, and Treylon Burks is a guy that at one point I was actually higher on him because I was like, he's a day 1 or day 2 guy. And then he became a solid day 1 guy. I'm like, whoa, we need to back up a little bit. Now I'm actually lower on Treylon Burks than a lot of people. So, I mean, again, it's eye of the beholder. But if you're Washington, if he makes it to, like, if you trade up for Travon Walker, I'm just going to be confused. Just period. I'm going to be confused. If you take him at 11, and I hate to bring this up again because it's already been talked about, and you then trade Da'Ron Payne to get mid-round draft capital back, then I'm like, okay, you didn't love anybody else at 11. So you come in here, you hope that you upgrade Da'Ron Payne, and you take Da'Ron Payne out of the equation, you get some more draft picks back, and now maybe we get safety, wide receiver, whatever with those picks. Then I understand the strategy behind it. We'll just have to see if it, develops.
Well, I guess under that scenario, because that's an interesting one that I didn't really think of. Would you? So Travon Walker would play inside then, as
right,
opposed
in a 4-3,
to
he'll play inside, and,
right, okay.
and he's projected to fit best as a 3-4 end,
right?
Which typically your 3-4 ends would kind of move inside.
Right? Exactly. I wonder.
It's rough.
I mean, God, there's a lot of different scenarios that I can play in my mind, but I guess I should have probably thought about the Payne one. But then you're subtracting from last year's good run defense, Payne, Ioannidis, Tim Settle, and really kind of hoping that you get it right with Travon Walker while ignoring your other needs. And like you said, maybe getting a couple of extra draft picks. Because remember, if you make the pick at 11, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to fill the 3rd round and the 5th round void that you have right now, not to mention the 3rd/2nd round void that you have already on the books for next year. So that's going to be interesting to see how that scenario plays out. I'm not sure I would be a big fan, quite honestly, of this whole thing. All right, guys. We are coming back with a final segment right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. More barbs in the political game. Jason Friedman taken a task by one side. We'll explain more as we wrap up LOC. But guys, have you tried the Built Bar Puffs? We tell you about them all the time because if you're missing out on the Built Bar Puffs, you're missing out on the first ever protein-infused marshmallow and protein-infused marshmallow treat. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're delicious-y, and they're not a protein bar. They are a treat. And again, they're covered, much like Built Bars are, in 100% chocolate. You can choose a couple of different flavors: yummy, cinnamony, churro, coconut marshmallow, or again, my favorite, banana cream pie. Or you can go with the regular Built Bars, and there's nothing regular about them. As you know, most of them have about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. So they are delicious for you for a late night treat, for a meal replacement after a workout. You are going to love them. Whether it's David's favorite, mint brownie, whether you're a coconut almond fan, or this month, try the white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious. They're all healthy for you. And go to built.com where they're coming out with different flavors all the time. Caramel, brownie. Oh, so good. Use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off at built.com by using, again, the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
Final segment here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. David Harrison and Chris Russell on Twitter at RussellMania621, at DHarrison82, and the show at LO Commanders, which Chris, Reese Waters, your buddy over there at Team, my buddy as well, but your coworker at Team 980 pointed out to me the other day that at LO Commanders is dangerously close to at LOL Commanders. But hey, it is what it is.
I didn't hear the whole interview. I just heard the very end of it, and so I didn't hear that part. So I apologize, but I'm sure it was a bang up spot. I'm sure you represented us well, and you corrected him and say, Reese, everything's not a joke. Reese is a stand up comedian, right? He does this fancy TV show. He was a stand up comedian in a previous life. Not everything is a joke. Leave us alone, huh?
No, it's a lot of fun being on the air with Reese. I always enjoy talking to him. I'll tell you who's not enjoying some of their recent conversations, Chris. That's Jason Friedman. And, a lot of people support him. A lot of people think he's doing the right thing. But there are certainly members of Congress, or at least a member of Congress, who is not necessarily happy with the way that things are going down and how it relates to the House Oversight Committee investigation into the Washington Commanders is going.
Right. So we've known about this for a while, all the way back to the Congressional Roundtable, which happened on February 3rd of this past year, right? Yeah. That the Republican side of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, or House Committee on Oversight, I call them the HOC.
Right.
That they are very against the investigation into the Washington Commanders, Dan Snyder, and the NFL. So we've known that for a while. So they've made several inflammatory statements that we've talked about and covered. We again saw it at the Congressional Roundtable. So nothing should be surprising about this. James Comer, who is the ranking Republican on the House Committee on Oversight, said that Jason Friedman, the former employee who did allege and provide evidence of financial improprieties, and allegations against the Washington Commanders, should be given a chance, David, to amend his statements or face an investigation by the Department of Justice for false statements. Quote, It is a crime to knowingly and willfully make any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements or representation to Congress, including congressional staff, according to Comer. So now the question becomes, is this? Basically, this is a he said, she said game with evidence of some sort. We just don't know exactly what evidence.
Right.
Friedman's, I guess his whole being is being called into question. He's being shredded. Some of the things that the Washington Commanders sent in the letter to the Federal Trade Commission earlier this week were just downright nasty, awful. David, I'll just add this. I've talked to people behind the scenes that are involved in this. I can't say exactly who, but you're just going to have, viewers are just going to have to trust me. Listeners are going to have to trust me. They recognize that Jason Friedman is not a perfect individual, that Jason Friedman did some things that he is alleged to have done. However, they stand by him. They publicly, privately, the lawyers involved, Lisa Banks and KMB Legal, they are standing by their guy. They have documentation. The House Oversight Committee, the Democratic side, has proof beyond just testimony. They have actual proof to counter what Washington is saying. So basically, it becomes who and what side others are going to believe. And that means the Federal Trade Commission, and that could mean other elements of the federal government. And I don't know if this smear campaign by the team is going to absolutely take down Jason Friedman and make him wither away and go away.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, so it appears on certain levels that they're basically trying to scare Jason into going back into the shadows. And I think if you're Jason Friedman and if you're his lawyers and you're the people that are supporting him, you just have to understand, you're either telling the truth or you're not. Like, at the end of the day, Jason's either telling the truth or he's not telling the truth. And if he's telling the truth, then he's talking about what he can prove. Because again, and it doesn't always work out the way people want it to. But in this type of scenario, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So if Jason has proof of the things that he's saying publicly, then he has nothing to worry about. All the threats in the world and all the, Washington claiming he's just a disgruntled employee and all these other things in the world aren't going to take away from the evidence that he provides. Now, if he doesn't have the evidence to back up what he's saying, then quite honestly, I'm going to question the lawyer and say, why are you letting him get in front of Congress and say things that he can't prove in the first place? But if he has the evidence, then then all of the intelligently written threats from a congressperson or representative aren't really going to matter at the end of the day. And just like you, Chris, I saw someone, I can't remember her name to save the life of me on Twitter, but she identified herself as a former employee of the team. Not sure what capacity she was in, but she mentioned that Jason, during her entire time there, she went through some things, and Jason was always a friend to her and backed her up and helped her out through some of those sticky situations. None of us are perfect. All of us are flawed. It was bound, and I think he had to have known that his lawyers had to warn him that, listen, you got fired in October 2020, then you decide to come out with this stuff. That's going to come up, and you're going to be painted in a certain type of light. So this shouldn't be anything that Jason wasn't necessarily prepared for. But really, Representative Comer not saying anything that's necessarily untrue. It is a crime to knowingly, willfully make false statements or provide false material in front of Congress or to any legal authority. That's well known. Really, what it does is sounds much more threatening and ominous than it actually is, unless, like I said, Jason did lie or fabricate evidence. So as long as he didn't do any of those things, he's got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be more developments maybe not every day, but every week for sure. And we're going to stay on top of it the best we can without beating you guys over the head. But we do have to pass along what is being said and what is being exchanged in many different forms. But we thank you guys for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and your first watch. If you're watching on YouTube of the day, now make your second listen of the day, the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Ryan Tracy, former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, as they bring the NFL draft to life each and every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. We'll be back after the weekend as we count you down to the NFL draft, which is coming in less than a week. If you want to hop in, it's Locked On Washington Commanders at gmail.com or on the voicemail 301-615-3577. That's 301-615-3577. For David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders at SI.com's Fan Nation, I'm Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980 and the Audacy app. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, don't you dare drive like a maniac, and thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.